Welcome back, and thank you for joining me for episode 2 of our Mental Health Awareness Month series, Trauma and the Mind, Unpacking the Invisible Wounds. I'm your host, Dr. Crystal Consinari, and today we're diving into one of the most important and often overlooked conversations, the hidden connection between trauma and mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Trauma doesn't always leave physical scars, but it can deeply affect the way we think, the way we feel, the way we relate to the world. In fact, many people live with symptoms of mental health challenges without ever realizing that trauma is at the root. So, in this episode, we'll explore why emotional deregulation and mood swings may be a trauma response, how hypervigilance and constant anxiety can stem from past experiences. We'll take a look at the connection between trauma, depression, and emotional numbness. We'll talk a little about what PTSD and C-PTSD really look like. And then we're going to look at how childhood trauma quietly follows us into adulthood, impacting everything from self-worth to relationships. So, whether you're navigating your own journey or supporting someone else, this conversation will help you see mental health through a new lens. It'll help you to see that healing isn't just about managing symptoms, it's about understanding the deeper cause. So, take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's uncover the truth about the traumas and trauma's hidden impact on our mental wellness. So, let's begin. Let's start with why emotional deregulation and mood swings may be a trauma response. When someone has experienced trauma, especially if it was repeated, unresolved, or occurred in childhood, it can deeply affect how their brain and nervous system manages emotions. This often leads to emotional deregulation, which means struggling to control or struggling to manage emotional responses in a healthy way. And here's why. The brain gets wired for survival, right? When we experience trauma, remember last week we talked about how our brain automatically gets into that response, that survival mode. And trauma affects the brain's survival centers, especially the amygdala, causing it to become hypersensitive to perceived threats. And this can lead to heightened emotions, it can lead to overreactions, or it can lead to emotional shutdowns. And this can happen even in situations that aren't actually dangerous, right? It's a perceived threat, not necessarily an actual threat. And the prefrontal cortex is overwritten during this time. And this part of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, it helps us reason. It helps to regulate our emotions and it helps us to make decisions. But when trauma takes over, the prefrontal cortex can become less active, which makes it harder to pause, it makes it harder to reflect, and it makes it harder to choose calm responses. And that's why you may see someone go from 0 to 100 emotionally, and they may not truly understand why. So then there are the stored emotions from our past. Unprocessed trauma stores emotions and that emotional energy in our bodies. Triggers like certain words, certain environments or tones can resurface these hidden memories, causing sudden mood swings or emotional outbursts that feel out of proportion to the moment. And then there's the nervous system that's on edge. Chronic trauma keeps the nervous system stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, making it hard to feel safe or calm. And this leads to emotional exhaustion and unpredictable shifts in moods like anger, sadness, irritability, or numbness. But the bottom line here is that if you find yourself feeling like your emotions are too big, too fast, or too confusing to manage, it may not be that you're too emotional, right? It may be that your nervous system is trying to protect you from something that it feels perceived as a threat. But healing is possible. Healing starts when we recognize the connection between our past and our present patterns, and we begin to give ourselves compassion, and we begin to utilize tools to help us heal. Then there's hypervigilance, and there's that constant anxiety that can stem from our past experiences. When someone has lived through trauma, especially experiences where they felt unsafe, where they felt powerless or threatened, Their brain and their bodies adapts for survival. And one of the most common adaptations is hypervigilance. And that's a state of constant alertness that often feels like chronic anxiety. Trauma rewires our brain for safety. Remember that, right? That's the survival. It doesn't rewire our brains for peace. After trauma, the amygdala, sorry about that, the brain's alarm system becomes overactive. It constantly scans for danger, right? Even when there's no real threat, it's scanning. And it's our body's way of saying, if I stay on guard, maybe I can keep it from happening again. And this creates a nervous system that's stuck in that fight or flight mode. And it leads to constant muscle tension. It leads to sleep problems, difficulty relaxing, overanalyzing situations, or reacting strongly to minor triggers. So, what does hypervigilance feel like, right? It feels like always needing to be ready. It's feeling jumpy or being easily startled. It's struggling to trust people or to trust environments. It's overthinking every interaction or outcome. It's scanning for exits when you walk in a room, or you're scanning for threats in public areas. It's being emotionally exhausted by the end of the day. That's what hypervigilance feels like. And why does this happen? Hypervigilance, as I stated, is a protective response, and it's developed during times when safety was not guaranteed, like during childhood abuse, during neglect, during domestic violence, betrayal. Over time, the brain forgets how to relax because it believes that relaxing equals vulnerability. But you can go from surviving to healing, right? Our bodies can heal. And through trauma-informed care, through nervous system regulation, through faith-based practices and safe relationships, you can learn to feel safe again, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually safe. As Isaiah 26:3 reminds us, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. So healing is possible. Overall healing is possible. So I want to now talk a little bit about the connection between trauma, depression, and emotional numbness. So many people think of trauma as something that causes fear or anxiety, but trauma can also lead to depression, and it can lead to an overwhelming sense of emotional numbness. When the brain and the body are constantly under stress or trying to survive, they can begin to shut down, not just physically, but emotionally. And here's what happens there. The nervous system becomes overloaded, right? After ongoing trauma or prolonged stress, your nervous system can become exhausted. When your body can't sustain fight or flight mode any longer, it often shifts into freeze or shutdown mode. And that's a place of emotional withdrawal or fatigue. So our nervous system becomes overloaded. Then there's numbness as a survival strategy that kicks in. And emotional numbness isn't a weakness, it's a protective strategy. When the pain is too overwhelming, the brain creates distance by blunting all feelings. It blocks them out, not just the painful ones, right? It blocks out all feelings. The result is you may feel disconnected from others. You may be disengaged from joy or excitement. You may feel like you're living on autopilot, or you may be indifferent, even to the things that you used to care about. So that's what it feels like. And trauma fuels depression, right? Depression is often rooted in unresolved trauma. Feelings of shame, helplessness, and loss of safety create deep emotional wounds that can result in persistent sadness, hopelessness, lack of motivation, difficulty finding meaning or purpose, fatigue, and that's fatigue even after you've rested. That's how trauma can begin to fuel depression. And it's not laziness, and it's not a lack of faith. Emotional numbness and depression after trauma aren't signs that you're lazy. It's not a sign that you're weak, and it's definitely not a sign that you're not spiritual enough. They're signals from your nervous system that you've been carrying too much for too long. Healing begins when we stop judging the symptoms and we start tending to the root. Remember that. Healing begins when we stop judging the symptoms and we start tending to the roots. And numbness is not permanent. With safe support, again, with trauma-informed therapy and spiritual grounding, you can begin to feel again, right? You can begin to have those emotions, not just pain, but you can experience joy, peace, and connection. You're not broken. You're healing. Remember that. So now, what PTSD and C-PTSD really look like? I do want to make sure to touch on that. Trauma doesn't just live in the past. It lingers in the mind, in the body, and in the nervous system. And while many people associate post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with combat or catastrophic events, it can result from any experience that overwhelms your ability to cope or to feel safe. And when that trauma is repeated or prolonged, it can evolve into something deeper, and that's complex PTSD. That's C-PTSD. So what exactly is PTSD? PTSD occurs after a single traumatic event or a series of traumatic experiences, and it includes symptoms such as flashbacks or intrusive memories. You're reliving the trauma, nightmares or sleeping disturbances, hypervigilance. You're being on constant alert. PTSD is avoidance of people, places, or topics that trigger the memory. It's emotional reactivity or outburst. It's feelings of guilt, feelings of shame, or fear. Those are some of the symptoms of what PTSD looks like. It's not just about remembering the trauma. It's about reliving it. And it's often when you least expect it, right? So what is C-PTSD? Complex PTSD. C-PTSD develops from chronic or repeated trauma, especially in childhood, things such as abuse or neglect, growing up in a chronic or unstable home, where there may have been long-term exposure to violence or betrayal. You may have been emotionally abandoned. C-PTSD includes all the symptoms of PTSD, plus difficulty with emotional regulation. You experience the mood swings, rage, deep sadness. There's persistent negative self-beliefs, thinking things like, I'm broken, I'm unlovable. There's shame and guilt that won't go away. There are trust issues and relational struggles. There's feeling disconnected from your identity or from your reality, right? It's disassociation. There's chronic anxiety and there's a deep fear of abandonment. So it's not just about what happened to you, it's about how it changed you. That's C-PTSD. So what PTSD and C-PTSD can feel like in your daily life, it can feel like avoiding phone calls or social interactions because you're emotionally drained. It's panicking when someone raises their voice. It's feeling like you're too much or you're not enough in every room. It's crying and not knowing why, or feeling nothing at all. It's having a full body response to a smell, to a sound, or to a situation that reminds you of your past. It's believing you always have to fix, you always have to perform or protect to stay safe. And remember, guys, you're not your diagnosis. You're not what happened to you. And with the right support, trauma-informed therapy, I will always go back to that, nerve system regulation, faith-based healing practices, and safe community, you can heal. It's not about erasing the past, but it's about reclaiming your future. So what about when the past doesn't stay in the past, right? Let's take a look at how childhood trauma quietly follows us into adulthood. Childhood, right, is meant to be a time of love and learning. But when the season is marked by neglect, abuse, chaos, or unmet emotional needs, the effects don't just disappear with age. They follow us. They follow us quietly into our adult lives, into our adult choices, and into our adult relationships. And trauma in childhood may look like always trying to be the good kid to avoid punishment, being the caregiver in a house full of adults, feeling unseen, unheard, or unimportant, witnessing violence, addiction, or instability, having to earn love, or having to walk on eggshells for safety, even when it wasn't labeled trauma. At the time, right? It may not have been labeled as trauma. The body still remembers what the mind tries to forget. So someone may not have called your situation trauma, but your body still remembers that. And here's how it shows up in adulthood. It shows up struggles with self-worth, right? Constantly second guessing yourself, feeling like you're never enough, no matter how much you've achieved. It's internalizing shame or guilt for things that weren't even your fault. There are relationship challenges, right? That comes with fear of abandonment or getting too close, a fear to get too close, becoming overly responsible for others' emotions, settling for toxic dynamics because this feels familiar, right? It's being hyper independent or never asking for help. Or it shows up as emotional regulation issues. You're quick to shut down or you're quick to lash out. You have difficulty identifying or expressing your emotions, or you deal with feeling emotionally numb or disconnected. Then there's people pleasing and perfectionism. And that looks like trying or tying your values to your performance or to usefulness. It looks like avoiding conflict at all costs. It looks like taking care of everyone but yourself. And remember, guys, the wounds are invisible. You may not see the wounds, but they are real. Childhood trauma trains your brain and your body to live in survival mode long after the danger is gone. You may not realize how much of your adult life is shaped by coping mechanisms that once kept you safe as a child. But here's the truth. You're not broken. You adapted. And now you have permission to stop surviving and to start healing. Again, you're not broken. You adapted. And now you have permission to stop surviving and to start healing. And here's what healing can look like. It looks like learning to trust yourself. It looks like setting boundaries without guilt. It looks like reparenting the little you who never got what they needed. It looks like replacing shame with compassion. And it looks like letting love in slowly and safely. And as we close today's episode, I want to leave you with this truth. Many mental health struggles aren't just symptoms, they're signals. Signals of pain, of stories untold, and of trauma that hasn't yet had the space to heal. So today we've explored how trauma can quietly show up as anxiety, depression, emotional numbness, hypervigilance, or even mood swings. We've looked at how conditions like PTSD and complex PTSD are often rooted in unresolved, often unseen pain. And these aren't just mental health issues. They're human responses to what your nervous system perceives as threat, even when the world looks safe on the outside. So if any of this resonated with you today, know that you're not alone. You're not beyond help. Healing is possible. But it starts by naming the wounds, by making space for the pain, and by offering yourself compassion. So next week, guys, we will continue this journey by looking at how trauma impacts the body, not just the mind. We'll explore somatic responses, chronic stress, and how unhealed trauma can manifest physically. So until then, be kind to yourself. You are worthy of peace. You are worthy of healing. And I'm Dr. Crystal again. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in episode 3.